So in terms of, rather than seeing how different Waite is with his take on the tarot compared to Crowley's take on the tarot, I mean seeing it in terms of the worldview of two men, Crowley and Waite, rather than saying the Thoth is like this, Rider Waite Smith is like this. They are two different systems, and then you're trying to say, okay, this is how it works for one deck and this is how it works for another deck, as if they are not related in any way. The thing is, for me, it's easier. I found it is easier to understand both decks in relation to each other rather than separate from each other. So in this case, I've mentioned in my previous video in terms of worldviews, in that these are two guys seeing the same thing but taking away different things from the same thing. And so let's start with, for example, I don't have my Rider Waite Smith traditional deck. The closest thing I have is this one here, which is Tarot of the New Vision, where they sort of play around with perspective. So I thought that was quite apt as well, because this deck talk of perspective within the imagery of the Rider Waite Smith. And here we are talking about perspective between the two men, Crowley and Waite. So as I mentioned in my previous video, let's start with the court. Here you see the highest ranking person is the Knight of Fire. His element remains fire. The Queen of Water. The Prince, which is in this narrative is the son of the Knight and the Queen, and is the king to be. So he remains heir. When I say remain, because I'm assuming that most of us come to Crowley's Thoth from Waite's system, or Waite's take on the tarot, and then this is the princess or the daughter. So as I've mentioned in my other video, in terms of Waite's worldview, this comes from a worldview where a world is still yet to be conquered, where the field is yet to be cleared, and a castle is yet to be built, and a state is yet to be formed. So fire, the Knight, is the one that leads the way. He is the one who opens up the world so that the Queen can exist, so that the Prince can exist, and therefore the King in the future can exist, and the Princess. So in Waite's point of view, in terms of zeitgeist or worldview, in Waite's point of view, his worldview is a world that is stable, that is already stable. The kingdom is already formed. So in a world like that, the leader is heir, the king, and of course the Queen. And then the Knight, the fire, is someone who maintains that stability. He is no longer the one who forge ahead and give shape to something that is yet, he isn't someone who come in and forge the way and give shape to the state, the nation, the kingdom. He is the person who maintains. Fire in this worldview exists to maintain the status quo, while air is there to conduct and to lead and to make sure that structures are working and to forge ahead to what is next. Once the kingdom is formed, it's set up, it's erected, it is a functioning kingdom, a functioning society, air takes charge, and then there is the page, of course. So the interesting thing here is between the king and the knight, obviously. And what I want to say is that I think saying that the king here is the knight and the knight here is the prince, simply translating it like that, simply imposing Rider Waite Smith's system or Waite's point of view of tarot and the world onto Crowley's, I believe we're going to miss a huge dimension or a huge layer to understanding each of the systems. So my own thought on that is related to what I wanted to say about the translational context of sacred texts and how I approach sacred texts in the context of translation. As I've mentioned in my other video, I want to make a separate video on that because I believe it is quite an important point or quite a major point that I from my perspective, of course, that I wanted to share with everyone is that approaching sacred text or anything, you always, even pictures like this, not only text, you always remember contextual and historical context. You always remember to say to yourself, look at the picture, it is Western, it is European, and it is medieval, for example. In this case, the knights, the emperors, and all that sort of thing. But we always, or often, I found we neglect translational context. So in this particular instance, when you translate, in my opinion, for some of you who speak more than one languages, you will get some appreciation of this, is that when you translate, you don't just translate image to image. You don't just translate words to words. What I found is that when you translate language, or whether it's text or visually, effectively you are translating ideas, you are translating worldviews, you are translating concepts, understandings, and people's perspectives. So I feel that in order to try and understand these two guys, or these two perspectives, or these two systems, I think we will deny ourselves a huge layer and a huge dimension of learning experience if we do not consider translating their worldviews as well as translating their text and their images, if you know what I mean. And so, just very quickly, the knight is always on a horse, so that's consistent with knights in Waite's system, in Waite's worldview, and the prince is always on a chariot. In Crowley's depiction of the prince. And so something else other than the courts, and I'm going to stick to just one suit to not overcomplicate this, and with the same principle of translating worldviews, you can also see these are not the only ones, and I'm by no means an expert in Thoth. My learning is still pretty early in my learning journey with the Thoth, Crowley's Thoth, that is. But these are the ones that jump to me the most, and I thought I'll share that with you now. This, I think the title of this card is Ruin. That's a 7 of coins. And look at Waite's 7 of coins. Waite's take on 7 of coin is that point of potentiation, if that even a word. It is the beginning of a potential, while for Crowley, it is a point of saturation. It's almost as if, look at that. I don't have to say very much. And look at that gloomy picture. And you see that things are it just come to a point where you're not, it's at a point of decay almost. It hit the roof, it hits the top, the zenith, I think it's called. And then the curve is going down, it's saturated. We look again at 7 here. Look at that depiction of the 7 of Cups. Is that decay? It's just a point of saturation. And here, it is the beginning of potential. It is the beginning of possibilities. And whether you have to be careful of beginning of possibilities or not, the kind of caution that you have to take around the beginning of all these possibilities is part of the dynamic of possibilities. You can get carried away with daydreaming. You have to be careful that your choices are in fact real choices, etc., etc. But the point is, it is all that potential waiting to happen, while here it is all that realities just saturating and decaying and ending at the end of its curve. Basically the curve is down. And so my point is that it is interesting for me to see that, in effect, these two are talking of the same thing. If you're looking at a curve up and down, these two, to me, at least for now, with my limited understanding of the Thoth, to me, it seems that both men were talking about that downward curve, but Waite is focusing on its way up, while Crowley is focusing on the curve going down. But each of them are actually talking about the same valley in this mountain and valley, up and down curve that is life. So another example is, for me, is the 4th, which jump out at me, is the 4 of coins, for example. Here it's stability, here is stagnation. So both stability and stagnation is two sides of the same coin. They are with every stability there is a seed of stagnation, and with every stagnation there is a seed of stability, if that makes any sense to you. And then the other one is a Four of Cups. Isn't so obvious at the moment, but again, there is a sense of stagnation and that sense of stability. So yeah, I am limiting the suits that I'm discussing here because I just want to illustrate a point that I think understanding the two systems, if you are beginning to take a peek at the Crowley's Thoth, I think instead of saying this is the card in Thoth and this is the card in Waite Smith, instead of saying in Waite Smith the knight is the knight and the king is the king, and then say in Thoth the knight is the king, I personally found it more valuable and more enriching to say, no, the knight is not the king, the knight is the knight. He is fire here, he is fire there. But in Crowley's worldview, in Crowley's Thoth, this knight is the leader of the pack, because in that world, the world is yet to be formed. In Waite's world, the prince has become a king. The prince has become king. They are both heir. But in this world, heir leads, because it's about structure, it's about dominion, it's about managing and maintaining the status quo. The knight is here. Fire in this world exists to protect the status quo, the stability, while here, fire is there to forge the way. So I feel that that is a lot more. There's a lot more things to work with there by looking at things in terms of the worldview of two men, rather than two systems saying two different things about the same system, if that makes sense. So that's it for now. I better get back to what I need to do. Bye.